Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing a possible new Call of Duty League franchise, and we're also going to recap and discuss some of the moves that have been made or confirmed since we last did an episode, which has been nearly 3 weeks now. It's been a while, but how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. Had a good night earlier. The Yankees won. One of my favorite pitchers, Luis Severino, made his return to the big leagues after 700 days because of injuries and stuff, so that was going well. But then I did my annual 1v1 chow with head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor, and it didn't go too well this time. But, that's just how it goes. He sent the chow, and I had to, accept for the brand, so... Uh, that's been my night. Pretty eventful, and now I'm ready to talk some COD.
Yep, no matter what, you have to send the chow, even if you know you're not going to win the chow. Um, and the Yankees, I did bet on them to make the playoffs, and it looked really good when they went on their 13-game win streak, and now it's not looking as sure. So, uh, I mean, I'm not as nervous as you because you actually care about them, but at least for my pocketbook, I hope that they make it. Um, and let's just talk about COD. I mean, we talked about a lot of potential moves and like reported moves because of Crohn's bomb. Like he basically reported the entire league's potential rosters, which was awesome. But one thing that has come out since we last had an episode, Jacob Wolf of .esports.com, he reported that the ownership group of the Washington Justice, the Washington Esports Ventures, they are making forward progress in talks to acquire and relocate the Chicago Call of Duty League slot. So if you want to read the article, it's at .esports.com. And I'll just read the lead from Jacob here. Washington Esports Ventures, the parent company of the Overwatch League's Washington Justice, is negotiating a deal that, if completed, would see it acquire the Chicago Call of Duty League slot and propose relocation to Washington, D.C. Sources familiar with those conversations told Esports. This would be obviously pretty big. This is we presume a result of this reported possible merger between the Dallas Empire and Optic Chicago, NRG Esports, potentially selling the Optic brand to Envy Gaming, and the Empire basically being transitioned out in favor of the Optic brand in Dallas, and Washington would be getting this new Call of Duty League slot, which would be a very interesting idea. What do you think of Washington possibly getting a Call of Duty League team?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. Just to note some key points, this would be something down the road, I feel like, just because, again, there's no even official confirmation of that Dallas and Optic merger yet. And until that actually happens, the Chicago spot can't technically be sold because it would still be Optic. So this seems like something we're going to have to wait until that happens, and then we'll likely have to wait a little bit longer after that to find out who officially gets that Chicago spot, or if it is this Washington group that relocates it. I did want to point out in Jacob's article, he did report this with Crone, in collaboration with Crone, but he does say that Washington is one of two serious parties in negotiations with NRG Esports, who own the current Chicago spot, for the actual franchise. So there is, according to that, there's technically a second party that's unnamed, and we don't know who that is at this time. So that's also something to just keep in mind. Could be interesting. Maybe something happens in this, like I said, period where we're waiting for stuff to be finalized, where this other party comes in and makes a, astronomical offer or something, and that changes up things. But Jacob does finish in that same paragraph. While the deal is not closed, there's optimism among league officials and parties involved that the deal will move forward, according to sources. So all indications at this time, at least it seems like Washington Esports Ventures will reportedly acquire this Chicago slot, assuming that the Optic and Dallas Empire merger goes through.
And just to clarify, in case this is like your first episode tuning in, or you don't really follow the CDL, if Washington Esports Ventures did buy this slot, the Chicago team would basically cease to exist. It's like relocating like the Raiders from Oakland to Las Vegas. But in this case, whatever team would be moved to Washington, they would have a new brand. It would not be Washington Optic or whatever, because this has been something that Jacob and Crone have been reporting on. But if Optic or NRG did end up selling the brand of Optic to Dallas, the Empire brand would pretty much cease to exist in the CDL, and then it would be Optic Dallas, Dallas Optic, whatever. And Jacob does say that, quote, a new brand for the team would be created during the downtime between now and the 2022 Call of Duty League season. So that'd be kind of a quick turnaround. We don't really know when the beginning of the 2022 season will actually be, but if we take the past 2 years, sometime like between January and March, which would be, I don't know, like 4 or 5, maybe 6 months at the very tops. It's just a very interesting idea. I was not expecting this. I was expecting more of a endemic esports brand like Cloud9. I know we've discussed it in the past. This was obviously before the Halo teams were announced, but we were talking about Rise and Cloud9, and there are a lot of other esports organizations that could come into Call of Duty. We don't really want to speculate about who that second team could be, but I think there's just a lot of options, and and I think that's good, at least that it's just not. It's good for the CDL and it's good for Call of Duty Esports that it's not just the Washington team who already owns an Overwatch League team, and they're already involved in like an Activision Blizzard esport. If it's another team, say Cloud9 or Rise Nation, those teams, I guess Cloud9 is, but Rise is not involved in the Overwatch League. So bringing a brand back to Call of Duty would be nice, or bringing a new face to Call of Duty would also be nice. I don't really have anything else to say about this. Do you have any other things that you want to talk about in regards to the Washington Call of Duty team?
Yeah, just 2 things real quick. I guess not necessarily quick, but you did mention the brand thing, and one thing we've talked about off camera that I'm going to bring to life now on the podcast, and I know Jacob even tweeted about it. It's kind of a joke, but it's something that would be really funny if it happened. A solution for the brand, if for some reason this goes through and they don't have enough time to come up with a brand, they could go down the route of the Washington football team, and we could have the Washington Call of Duty team in the CDL. I don't think that's what would happen, but it certainly would be funny and would lead to plenty of memes. But I know even like in one of my Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues, I have the Connecticut football team as one of my team names. So it's something I've been on board with since that team name change in the NFL. And that's just a quick joke I wanted to mention here. But in terms of this franchise, obviously Preston and myself aren't, experts in the Overwatch League in any sense whatsoever. But I just wanted to bring up some stuff that I found out about the Washington Overwatch League team. Just based off, going to their Wikipedia page. I don't know anything about their players or anything like that, but they were one of the expansion teams in the Overwatch League, so they came in 2019. And there were 20 teams after that expansion, so they came in 2019 and tied for 17th in the regular season then. Then in 2020, so last year, they came in 19th out of 20 in the regular season. But then, probably due to COVID or something, they allowed like all the teams to make the playoffs. Potentially, that's speculation. I obviously, again, don't know exactly how it worked in the Overwatch League. But according to this Wikipedia page, they came in 19th out of 20 in the 2020 regular season, and then they came in third in the North American playoffs. If you look at the North American playoffs page, it looked like there was only 13 teams there. So I'm assuming because of COVID, they had some region split in the OWL. But it looks like Washington went on a little bit of a run there in the playoffs, so that's somewhat interesting. And in this current season, they came in 10th place in the regular season, and I think the playoffs started tonight or soon for that. So, not really 100% sure, but I believe that's correct. So, that's just a brief history lesson there of this Washington groups because they own that Overwatch League spot. That's just their history in the Overwatch League. So doesn't necessarily mean anything for COD, but it doesn't seem like they've seen necessarily the most success in the Overwatch League. So I don't really know. They're unless they hire some people who have that history in COD, or like for example, if they bring someone like Aches on as GM, just for example, that could be a move that helps. But like if they don't have a background in COD or don't know, who knows what the roster will look like. There's a lot of things that's gonna happen throughout the next course of the next couple months with this franchise before we actually see the team play if the sale goes through and all that yada yada.
The biggest thing for me is just if really any team is willing to invest, like after you get into the league, after you've basically put up your millions of dollars to get a franchise in the Call of Duty League, how invested are you to making a winning brand or a popular brand? We've seen in the past, we've gave Paris grief about it, about like not really fielding competitive rosters or not spending as much money as these other teams do. Like we know that some of these other teams are spending like almost like unfathomable amounts of money on their rosters, and that's what you want from your teams. I know that it's not the most realistic or sustainable because Call of Duty esports is not like just like a lot of esports leagues, they're not the most profitable. A lot of these teams are running in the red, and it's very hard for these teams to kind of imagine a way of making money, but it doesn't really ingratiate yourself to the fans of the league if you're not spending money, if you're not trying to build the best possible roster. So regardless of what they've done in the Overwatch League, like you listed off their accomplishments, I have no idea. Like I haven't watched Overwatch League since like the second week of the first season, so I have absolutely no idea about how these teams operate. But I mean, I hope that if this does come true and there is a Washington Call of Duty League team, I hope that they're just willing to put money into it and listen to the right people. I'm not really sure who the right people are because that changes from time to time, but I would love to see some veteran Call of Duty players be able to kind of build their roster. Maybe Aches has a future as a general manager. But you never know. It's a very important thing that we have the most competitive teams because you don't want a new team to come in and then like immediately they're kind of shunned off to the side and they don't really put up a fight against some of these better teams.
No, I agree. And again, kind of like you said, at the end of the day, I liked your point that it really doesn't matter what this team's past or what the people behind the Washington esports venture, what their history is in Overwatch League or anything for that matter. It comes down to what they're willing to put into the CDL to try and grow this thing and make it as big as possible moving forward. So As I said before, I think it's gonna be a while before we hear anything official on this, but it's an exciting report. Obviously, for a lot of people, if you're a Chicago fan, probably a little disappointing to have to consider the thought that Chicago will potentially no longer have a Call of Duty team. But who knows, with potential expansion down the road, maybe Chicago could get a spot back if it ends up selling. A lot of question marks right now. We're just gonna have to wait and see.
And one last thing before we move on to our next thing, the roster for this team, whether it moves to Washington or they stay in Chicago, I mean, this is like if it stays in Chicago for the 2022 season, there are a lot of questions around this Optic Dallas merger because you would assume that the reported roster of Shotzi, Illy, Scump, and Dashy for the Dallas franchise. If the team was to stay in Chicago, what happens there? Does Optic try to field a team in Chicago, or what happens there? And if they do move to Washington, who knows what kind of players they're getting, because we're going to talk about in this episode, there are a lot of rosters that are either complete officially, like the teams have announced that they've signed these players, or they're not confirmed, but we trust the reports that these teams are going to stick together, and those are the rosters heading in. Like whatever team manager or general manager or coach that comes into that situation, they're put into a very difficult situation immediately because they have to identify 4 players at the very minimum to build a roster around when everybody else has already kind of picked the biggest and best players off the market.
The only thing I'll say to that is I think there are a lot of options in this offseason. I don't know how much we want to get into it, but I was listening to our last episode before this, and we were talking about, the last time we did an episode, and it's still true right now, that this Chicago spot, post-reported merger, and Paris, there are no players currently linked to either team. So that's 8 open spots in the league right now. And based on the movements we've seen from other teams, there are players who were in the league last year who aren't on a team, one, and there's also a lot of players who saw success in challengers last season who haven't been signed for the coming season. So I think I agree with your point that it's not ideal where it's not like there's a draft where you have to wait out picks and stuff like that, and it's not like they're coming in right in the beginning where they can go after anybody. But I don't think it's necessarily slim pickings. There are some, there are some good options based on what we've heard so far. I mean, first name that I'm thinking of right now is a guy like Methods. We've talked on the past episode of him saying he's unrestricted free agent, but even though it really sounds like he's a restricted free agent, regardless of that situation, it seems like Toronto is willing to let him move on. If this Washington franchise is looking for somebody to build around, he could, come into that team and give them not only a solid veteran AR, but somebody for content and stuff like that to try and help build the brand around. So, I don't know necessarily how much we want to dig into that, but I do think the franchise has some options for who it could do, who it could build a roster around.
Let's not get into it too much for this episode because we still have, who knows how many off-season episodes to go, and there will be even duller times in the future where we really don't have anything to talk about, and then we can start, picking off like our fantasy lineups for Paris or Washington, Chicago, whatever. So let's just talk about some of the stuff that we do know, though. We discussed at great detail the rosters that Crone had previously reported, the Los Angeles Guerrillas, Minnesota Rocker, LA Thieves, etc. Let's start at the very top, though. The Guerrillas, Crone reported on September 3rd that the Guerrillas were building around Slasher, who had just been released by the Los Angeles Thieves, and that they were targeting Hook, who was also on the Thieves. Gunless, who was last on the Seattle Surge, and Asim, who played last season for the New York Subliners. And on September 6th, LAG, they announced their roster for the 2022 season: Slasher, Hook, Gunless, and Asim. We talked about it on last episode. You seemed very high on this roster on paper. What do you think now that you've seen it officially? They've actually put in some effort in terms of their social media stuff and kind of hyping up their players. So what do you think about the LA Gorillas' new roster?
That was the big thing I was going to mention. I don't think my thoughts have changed at all on the roster from when Crone reported it to when it was officially announced. I still think on paper this team has the formula to be a strong roster no matter what the meta is, because you got Slasher on that main AR, you got Gunless on the flex. If it's 2 AR meta, Gunless runs the second AR. If it's a 3 sub meta, Gunless runs a third sub, and then you got Hook and Asim on the subs. So I think this is a good roster on paper. We talked about, Slasher having that past history with Gunless, past history with Hook. But for me, like you said, the big thing was we already saw LAG put out 2 videos on YouTube. It was like 2 10-ish minute Q&As with the duos from this. One of the videos was with Hook. One was with Hook and Slasher. The other was with Gunless and Asim. And I watched them when they were published. And I couldn't obviously quote anything exactly they said, but I know some of the stuff they were talking about, especially in the Hook and Slasher videos, trying, not necessarily getting revenge, but, just trying to, like, I don't even want to say prove the doubters wrong, just because I can't remember how they worded it, but it was talking about, like, kind of like bouncing back from last season. They were asked about the rivalry with LA because, again, they were both technically on the Thieves. Now they're on that other LA team. So they were asked about that. Gunless was asked in his video about, like that past history with Slasher, if they like squash the beef or anything like that. And I'm pretty sure Gunless said, like, when they were in talks to build this team, he either called or messaged Slasher and was just like, putting the past behind him or whatever and moving on. So it seems like this team's going to be in a good headspace, at least in that in that regard. And I believe Asim was talking about part of his reason for wanting to join the team was like the work ethic of the guys, which I found interesting too, because I feel like Asim's a really hard worker, and we've talked Asim's praises up on this pod plenty of times before. But to hear it from him, I think that speaks volumes, because it's going to be, he's expecting like everybody else on the team to put in that time and grind right when the game drops. I don't want to put words in his mouth there, but that's just the vibe I got from that video. So and like I said before, seems like they got a good recipe here on paper for a solid team, and I'll be excited to see them in action.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent on this team, obviously, because we've seen at the very best of their abilities, Slasher, Hook, and Gunless have been like some of the best players in the entire world at different points. And Asim, I think he's just like he's essentially classic in that you can put him into essentially any roster, and he's able to kind of fit wherever. He's able to do whatever the team needs him to do. And we saw that in New York last year. They had a lot of turbulence in terms of their roster, but he was consistent, and he was able to help that team actually achieve a lot of success compared to a lot of other teams. I think this is the roster like of a Stan Kroenke team who for the people that don't know him, he owns the Rams, the Los Angeles Rams. He owns, I believe, the Rockies, or like he owns a bunch of the Colorado sports franchises. You would expect for a guy that just built like this brand new stadium in downtown LA or Inglewood or whatever, that if you're like the last year's roster for LAG did not really live up to the expectations of like this really like rich billionaire building a roster, like building a team, like his company building a team. This is exactly what I would think. Like Slasher, Hook, Gunless, and Asim, like there's just so much talent on this roster, and all of them are veterans. I mean, I would guess that Asim is probably the youngest on this team now, but he's been on Phase. He was on Rocker last year. He was on New York this year. So I believe in this roster more so than any LAG roster they put in put on paper uh, since they started the franchise. So kudos to LAG, and I hope that everything goes well with this team, and I hope that they continue putting out content, and that goes for quite literally every other franchise as well, because it makes it more interesting, especially those docu-series that the Thieves and like E United used to do, and I think FaZe is also doing some. So hopefully they all just do
Rocker
that.
too,
Yeah, Rocker as well.
and obviously, yeah.
Let's talk about Rocker because Crone tweeted on September 3rd that he had been told that the Rocker would stick together with their roster of Attached, Standy, Priesta, and Major Maniac. They won the Stage 5 Major in that incredible comeback and then had a good showing at the CDL Championship. And then on September 9th, the Rocker did confirm that that roster will be staying for the beginning of the 2022 season. So Attached, Standy, Priesta, and Major Maniac are the confirmed roster for the Rocker for next season. What do you think about that?
I like it. It's to me. Can't remember exactly what I said last time we talked about it, but I just felt like there wasn't really necessarily like a one player switch that the team would make to like put them over the top, if that makes sense. And if you're going for like more than a one player change with this roster, I didn't really know who you would be swapping out. So it just felt like they were in a weird spot in that regard. So it made sense for me that they wanted to stick, obviously, like you said, winning that stage 5 major, pulling off. I don't even know if you have to say arguably, but I'll just say it. Arguably the greatest comeback in competitive Call of Duty history. Um, I'm happy to see that this team's sticking together. I think they have a lot of potential. In particular, I feel like they have some versatility too. That might be a little bit of a recurring theme for me with some of these rosters, but I just feel it's important because we don't know what the meta is going to be like in this next game. But you have guys on this team like Attach and Priesta who can really play that AR or sub role depending on what's needed of them. Even Major Maniac has used a sub at times in the past. The only guy we've only really seen Standy be that, in your face aggressive sub. But other than that, the other three guys have some aspect of versatility, which could be a key factor for this Minnesota team depending on the meta and Vanguard. So I like the move for them to stick, see what they're able to do for at least the start of the year. And go from there. With the success they had with picking up Standy, if they don't get off to the hottest start in the Vanguard season, they could, use their coaching staff or whatever resources they use to get Standy. They could go through a similar process to try and pick another up and coming rookie / potential rookie of the year candidate. I don't know if you're going to necessarily be able to pull it off 2 years in a row, but that's just something to keep in mind.
For me, this is probably the most interesting team in terms of who they sign as a substitute, if they do sign a substitute, because it's not the same situation as FaZe. Although they're both keeping the same rosters, reportedly or whatever with FaZe, despite that, like Minnesota does not have the success that FaZe does, where a few bad events or bad practices, the success will trump whatever poor performance you have, and they'll be able to stick it out. For Minnesota, I think if they sign a legitimate substitute, they're not signing like Saint to a subcontractor or whatever, but signing someone like I don't even know, like it would have to be someone very versatile. Maybe Classic would be a good idea. I don't know if he'll end up on a CDL roster at the beginning of the season, and I mentioned it earlier, but I think he's like a glue guy, and he could come in and at least stabilize a roster. But but someone like that could be slotted into a roster, preferably a flex, that could help them out if they go, say, and they get like a top 10 finish or whatever at the first event or the second event. Um, I just don't see this roster being able to withstand the entire year because there's just so much talent around the league that it just doesn't seem like it would happen, especially since they already made a change with this roster earlier this year. Like Major Maniac was in and out and in back into this lineup, so I'm not too confident in that. This foursome will actually stick together the entire season. But I'm interested to see actually what happens with them. With the Thieves, the Los Angeles Thieves, September 3rd, Crone, he reported that Octane was likely to return to the 100 Thieves, but signed with the Los Angeles Thieves, and he would also be joined by Envoy, who had been released by Optic earlier that week. And then September 10th, the Thieves, they confirmed that Envoy, September 9th, excuse me, Octane joins the Los Angeles Thieves. He officially signs with LAT. And then September 10th, Envoy, Kenny, and Draza are announced as the rest of the roster for LAT. So Octane, Envoy, Kenny, and Draza making up the 2022 Los Angeles Thieves roster. This was pretty much how we thought it would go. We've been talking for weeks, or I guess we haven't talked for weeks, but we spoke for basically since the end of the CDL season and the Surge dropping their roster during champs. We were basically saying that Octane seemed, the most reasonable fit for the Thieves, considering he has the history with Kenny from Black Ops 4, and I also said that Envoy would probably go to the Thieves because he was planning to sign with Seattle before the MW season. But the only variable was Draza. We weren't sure who was gonna be that fourth player because they still had Hook on the roster. So I personally wasn't sure if they were going to keep Hook and maybe put Draza on the bench again or what was going to happen there. But what do you think of this roster now that it's officially been confirmed?
Yeah, I like it. Just real quick, if you guys didn't see Octane's individual announcement video for the LA Thieves, it was pretty funny. They had like a little skit in there where Octane was having a nightmare, and Kenny then comes to his rescue and brings him a surge protector. So it was kind of entertaining. I liked it, but no. Then they had the whole team announcement after that. It was kind of actually like a cool press conference, and Enable was like asking them questions and stuff. So I like to see that, but in terms of the team, again, versatility is the key for me here. We don't know. Kenny has been, over the past couple of years, the player where he likes to run whatever gun he likes the most. We saw him in World War II, PPSH, Black Ops 4, didn't really like the SOG, so he was more of a Maddox guy. And then this last year, he was predominantly using the Krig instead of the 74U. So, I guess that's going to be the key for me here. It seems like he's going to head into the Vanguard season as an AR duo with Octane, and then Envoy and Draza would be the subs, but they do have that versatility where Draza and Kenny can play either role if necessary. So that's what I'm going to be looking for from this team. I think on paper, they have the potential to be a good team again. Seems like we say that a lot, and then stuff goes wrong for teams, so who knows what'll end up happening. But I'm excited to see what this team is able to do. And we've also talked about it before on the previous episode of the pod. If Envoy wasn't able to stay with Optic, even though, it seemed like he was kind of like the heir to Scump's throne, or however you want to say it, the Prince of Optic, whatever people have been saying. Now he goes to 100 Thieves. It seems like a good fit for him because he seemed like a natural in terms of content, and we know 100 Thieves put an emphasis on content, so he should slot in with this org from that regard and be a natural fit for them. So excited to see what this team is able to do this upcoming season.
The Toronto Ultra, they announced on September 14th that they were retaining their roster of Kleenex, Insight, Cammy, and Bance. They announced that this would be the 2022 roster and that they had locked them in until 2023. I mean, Call of Duty League teams are notoriously vague about what's actually happening, so that could mean that they have contracts through the 2023 season, or they could just be done after the 2022 season. Either way, the fact that the Ultra, who finished second at Champs this year and were really the second best team most of the year, at least since they benched Methods and put in Insight, they're sticking with that roster. I think that's a good thing. I feel. I mean, we saw last year, even the second place team, Atlanta FaZe, they made moves, even after being incredible throughout the season and losing at Champs. The Ultra, they figured that this is probably the best roster that they can construct, like without completely blowing up team chemistry and trying to sign like a huge free agent. What do you think of Ultra kind of running it back with their 2021 roster?
Yeah, I like the move to see the roster again. Like you said, they were basically the second best team throughout the entire past season, so it makes sense. As you mentioned, the big thing for me here with their announcement was that they said this is our COD League roster until 2023. So it was kind of vague, but in my eyes, I'm assuming that they likely signed 1+1 deals again, which means that they have them for this year and then plan to sign them to that +1 extension beyond that, which would get them, into that 2023 season. But like you said, who knows exactly what it means based on the vagueness of the tweet. Regardless, though, excited to see this team again back in action. The only real question it seemed like was around Kleenex. I believe, based on that player tracker the CDL had that hasn't really been updated last time I checked, that Bance, Cammy, and Insight were the only players re-signed. So there was rumors about Kleenex maybe potentially fielding offers from other teams and all that, but at the end of the day now, we know for sure Toronto has re-signed him, and the tissue is going to remain an issue for all other teams in the Toronto purple jersey.
The tissue probably got a pretty big bag, I'm assuming, from the Ultras, so congrats to him, presumably. But yeah, Toronto, they're sticking together. New York, we talked about on the last episode as well, that the rosters seem to be going their separate ways. We talked about Asim, who was on their roster last year. He's with the Los Angeles Guerrillas now. And Mac parted ways from the organization on September 17th. And we'll talk about his landing spot in the next spot. But the reported roster for this, according to Crone, he reported this on September 3rd. He said that Crimsix is the most likely option, that he is expected to join Clayster and Hydra, who were both on the subliners last year, and that the New York subliners would also acquire Neptune from the Florida Mutineers. Nothing has been confirmed on that end other than Mac's departure. That's the only thing that has really happened since we last talked to you. But I mean, it seemed. I mean, Crone has been, batting 100 or batting 1,000, I think, because he's been on everything, and we see that Clayster is playing games with Neptune and Hydra, and I mean, Krim trolled on his stream by putting up a Seattle Surge wallpaper on his desktop and acting like he got caught or something, but it does seem likely, and Crone has been incredible, and he's been reputable throughout this entire thing. So I wouldn't expect anything different, but nothing confirmed on that end. Do you have anything to add on the New York stuff?
No, just the same thing as last time we talked about it. The biggest thing with this New York team or the reported New York lineup is that if in order for it to come to fruition, New York has to buy out Krim from Dallas and Neptune from Florida. So, although like Preston just mentioned, we did have Clay tweeting tonight that he's playing Chals on Vanguard with Neptune. There is some legal and business stuff that would have to be done behind the scenes in order for Krim and Neptune to actually make their way to New York. So it could be a while before anything is actually confirmed for this roster.
Yeah. And Seattle, so Mac, he departed from the Subliners on September 17th, and then on September 20th, he was announced as a part of the new Seattle Surge roster, along with Accuracy, who was previously released from the Minnesota Rocker, Sib, who was a substitute for the Atlanta FaZe, and Pred, who is an APAC player that previously played on Renegades. So that's the roster for Surge. And a day before they announced their roster, the Surge announced that they had signed Phoenix as their head coach, and Novus, or not no, Novus. He was previously an analyst for the Los Angeles Thieves last season, and he is the new general manager of the Seattle Surge. So, what do you think about that? We had heard about the Phoenix thing, about him being a coach for the Surge, and then we had Crone had previously reported the roster for the Surge, but Novus or Novice, however you say his name, we didn't know about that as far as I know. So what did you think about that, and what do you think about the Surge's new look right now?
Yeah, that's certainly interesting to me. In regards to the Novus, I'm just gonna assume that's how you pronounce it, Novus. Um, that move is interesting to me. Because as far as I know, I don't know if we actually knew who Seattle's GM was the past 2 years. I think maybe it was that Bob Morris guy the first year, but I don't know if he was technically the GM. He might have just been working in the organization or something, so could be wrong there. But that is an interesting development, regardless of what's happened in the past with Seattle. Now we know for sure who is the GM for this year, and presumably we know who we could direct, questions, or fans can direct their complaints or whatever to for any discrepancies or I don't want to say hate, but just thinking about the past 2 years with Seattle, there was a lot of questions about why they weren't like going after or seemingly going after some like amateur talent, or why they weren't making roster moves, all that yada yada. Now with a face to that GM role, you presume that it could be a change in direction for the franchise, and it could even help propel Seattle to try and right the ship or get to the spot they want to be after 2 disappointing seasons early in the CDL.
So Bob Morris was the general manager for the Surge.
Okay.
I don't think he was there the second season, so maybe it just
No.
fell on Nubsy, or I don't know, like some unnamed manager above Nubsy. But yeah, I pulled up a Crone tweet. I actually didn't know that. I knew that he worked for the Surge and he was kind of around there, but yeah, so he was the general manager that first year, where there was a lot of complaints about them not being able to make moves, and so maybe that's not like the thing about this roster is, this is something we talked about with Paris. Like, if you're not willing to spend a bunch of money on these established players, and Accuracy and Mac are more established, I guess. Like in the CDL, they've Mac. I mean, at one point he was seen as like a really, up and coming young player that nobody really knew about. And Accuracy has been around for years, and he's won tournaments and everything. So But for just this roster in general, I mean, it's smart to go for these younger guys or the guys that have kind of been cast off from their teams because they're cheaper and they might be able to fit better into whatever financial structure you're going into for the next season. I mean, we don't know if that's still a problem for the Surge, but it was at some time, and I think we can just assume that they don't really want to spend a ton of money on these players to build a roster. So it looks like a good roster. Accuracy is like a great veteran AR, and he can really help out a team. Mac, he showed like flashes of being like really really good in New York. I haven't seen anything of Pred, but to be the only APAC player to make it out for this season and get signed to a team, I think that kind of shows that he's pretty damn good. And then Sib, he was reportedly close to being on the Subliners roster last year, and he's been kind of touted as one of the top like challengers players or substitutes for a while now. So I'm really interested to see what the Surge are able to do with this roster and their new front office.
Yeah, just speaking about the roster real quick, I feel like just based on these other teams that we've actually talked about be confirmed, you have to say that this is technically the weakest roster on paper out of these, that have been officially confirmed so far, just because in comparison it's to Toronto, who was arguably the second best team last year, and Minnesota, who was one of 3 teams to win a major last year, and then you have LAG and LAT, which you think are very talented on paper. So of these like 5 teams that have been recently confirmed, I guess I would have Seattle in that 5th slot, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think Seattle is doomed to have another failed season. I think there's certainly a lot of potential on this team. I'm in particular excited to see Sib and Pred make their debut, see what they're capable of doing. And a guy like Accuracy, he's always had that clutch gene, the ice in the veins, however you want to say it. But I feel like he might be like in a spot where he's got to try and prove himself again, and I don't know if that's the right way I want to say it, but it's just he was dropped from Minnesota, and then they go on to make that run at the Stage 5 major. So he could just be in a position where his stock is lower than he might like it to be, and he wants to come out with the fire and prove any doubters wrong. And even with Mac, like New York was looking strong, and then they had that little dip in performance towards the end of the season. So maybe both those guys, their stocks aren't the highest in comparison to where they've been in the past, and they might want to prove some people wrong. So I think there's a lot of potential with this Seattle team. I'm not sure exactly what to expect from them, but regardless, we'll just have to wait and see what happens when the season actually starts.
As I fight my camera, yeah, I think Seattle, there's a lot of potential, like you said, and just kind of, I don't know, like that's better like than what they've had in the past, where there hasn't been like the potential that they had like known commodities, like they've had veteran players, everybody knew what they were getting with them. We don't really know what you're getting with Sib and Pred, or even Mac to an extent, because I mean he hasn't been in the CDL all that long, and he was on that New York roster. We don't really know if he's going to be even better. And I do agree with you on the accuracy part that he's in a tough spot because he is essentially like, I'm not saying at the end of his career, but this is he's a veteran player that essentially needs a good year to kind of get back up to like the top teams, if that makes sense. Like, I think I would say to someone like Temp kind of needs that year as well, where he started the season on the Thieves, and then he got benched by the Thieves and then made his way to Paris. I think he needs kind of like a rehab year essentially to get his stock up again so he can get to those top teams and make more money and compete for championships, because I don't see a championship in Seattle's future, at least with this current roster and then some of the other rosters that we know are gonna be formed.
Yeah, and just real quick too, you reminded me of this tweet when you were just talking. Novus, the general manager who we were talking about, tweeted when they confirmed the roster. He said, quote, taking a different approach to the lineup this year. High ceiling talent alongside veteran leadership. Every one of these guys has something to prove. Can't wait to get the season started. This wasn't the tweet I was thinking of. There was something. I'm gonna scroll real quick, but it was mentioning. I thought it was that one where he was saying that, like, it was something about long-term success. Oh, here it is. It's his tweet from September 17th when he was announced as general manager. He said, very excited to represent the city of Seattle for the 2022 season. This year, we begin laying the foundation for long-term success with explosive talent backed up by an amazing staff. So that long-term success kind of stuck out to me when I just saw that tweet, where it seems like even if Seattle doesn't see the immediate results this year, they are going in the direction where they have these young guys like Sib and Pred, and potentially, they want to see what they can get from them, and maybe if they're budding stars right away, they build around them. Or if the team struggles this year, they try to rebuild immediately, and keeping in mind that long-term success, it would seem like they would be enticed to go after some up-and-coming prospects. So that's just something that kind of like triggered in my mind, and I wanted to bring up real quick. We'll be interested to see what Seattle brings to the table this year and throughout the years to come with CDL.
That mindset is very apparent in traditional sports, obviously, where teams tank or they are basically trying to build a weak roster and acquire other like assets, maybe young prospects or draft capital like draft picks, even years and years down the road. We don't have a draft in the CDL, but there are a lot of young players that really haven't been discovered, or they're not getting the opportunities or whatever that they deserve. There are a lot of players in challengers that could probably immediately contribute to CDL teams, and maybe that's the route that Seattle goes down. I think it's this, like, if you're not Paris or London, where you're in a different country and you can build like a foundation that's like obviously tied to like whatever city or country you're in. I don't think there's going to be 4 Seattle players, like, Seattle-born players playing for the Surge, but they could go a route of, every year they're essentially trying to improve one position, essentially. Like, if say a half of this roster turns out to be pretty good, but the other half doesn't really fit, then next year they bring in 2 Challengers players to play with the 2 players that actually did perform well. I think it's a smart idea. We haven't really seen it in the CDL where anybody's taking like a long-term approach to it, because everybody basically scrapped their rosters after the first season when it went 5v5 to 4v4. And this season, I mean, we could be seeing Toronto or Minnesota, and obviously FaZe, like they might be building for the future, but it's hard to. I think the pressure of winning now and fielding a competitive team right now, I think there's a lot of pressure on, say, Novus or any of these other GMs around the league to like not be completely horrible next season. We don't really have any other. I mean, the news that we covered on the last episode, but didn't really get any confirmation on since then. London, it looks like their roster is going to be Zero, Nasty, Gizmo, and Afro. That was what Crone reported. We haven't really had any confirmation other than Afro playing with Gizmo and Nasty on the Vanguard beta. So, I mean, Crone is very reputable in terms of those reports. So, I mean, I'm inclined to believe him. We just haven't been given confirmation. Atlanta FaZe, I mean, there's no way that they're making any changes. Somebody would have to be really, really stupid for that to happen. So we haven't got any confirmation in terms of that, but I mean, I don't expect any changes there. Florida is kind of the weird one. No confirmation since we last discussed it. Which, if you didn't listen to the last episode, Florida, they extended all of their players. So they extended Skies, Awakening, Havoc, and Yeez. Yeez was their bench player. He came in, late in the season as a substitute, but he never really got to play. But Crone tweeted on September 3rd that the Mutineers were interested in signing Dave Patty, who plays main AR in the Challenger scene. We discussed it then. I think we were both a little kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I felt like this wasn't a good fit just based on roles, because what are the odds that they're going to be, even 2 AR roles, or especially 3 AR roles in Vanguard. So like bringing in another possible assault rifle player didn't really make a lot of sense, but that might be the way that they're going. We haven't heard anything else about what this team would be. We did discuss how Neptune would have to be bought out from his Mutineers contract to go to New York, so that's something to continue to look for. And then we discussed it earlier, but the Dallas Optic merger, that reported roster is still the same. And then there was a Discord message, or a message chat with Scump, Hex, Hastro, and Rambo. They were all in the same Discord chat, so I mean, take that as you will. Paris, they're reaching out to amateur players. That shouldn't really come as too big of a surprise for them. September 3rd, Crone tweeted that the Legion, they reached out to European and North American Challengers players, but no lineup or anything. And then we talked about the Washington Call of Duty team and how they don't really have a roster if they're acquiring that spot, and if they don't, and if Chicago kind of keeps the slot, then there's no roster right now anyway. So nothing more on that end. Do you have any comments or thoughts on whatever we didn't really discuss at length today?
No, I mean, that's just the spot we're in right now. Gonna have to wait. Technically, like we were just mentioning, we have 5 teams really confirmed in LAG, LAT, Minnesota, Ultra, and the Surge. Atlanta is basically all but confirmed, so we really know 6 of the lineups for sure coming into next year. Then we have the reports for New York, London, and Dallas/Optic. And then we have kind of in like a tier below that, just like, the rumblings with Florida, and then uncertainty for Paris, and then the 12th spot. So we're gonna basically, we're kind of in a spot where we know we have confirmation for half the league. Questions for the other half of the league, and we're just gonna have to play the waiting game with Roster Mania to see what comes up.
Before we get out of here, let's talk about the Vanguard beta, because I'm assuming that you've gotten the chance to play it and play with like trim and everything. So for someone that hasn't played it, what do you think about Vanguard in its current state, and how would you enjoy it competitively?
Well, why don't you start? I've heard that you've been playing a ton of Vanguard and you've been really enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, you might have seen my my burner count simp, dropping like 150 kills in lobbies. Yeah, it's pretty easy, just as all the other Call of Duty games are.
No, but all seriousness, that there's the biggest thing with the beta for me. Like you said, I've been playing with Trem, my cousin Chris, Mike, Nick played a little bit. Jin obviously has played the least, just because IRL Jin things. But um, the biggest thing with the beta, and even outside of our friend group, is just people not realizing what this actually is, and it's the fact that it is a beta. So, some people have lost faith in COD developers having the ability to analyze stuff from the beta like this and make the necessary adjustments to improve the Call of Duty title before launch. But in an ideal world, that's the purpose of the beta. So there have been issues with this beta, in particular the new mode Patrol, which is kind of like a moving hardpoint that moves in like a set like circle or formation around the map. There's been some spawn issues with Patrol. There's been spawn issues just in general in this beta. So that's going to be something we're going to have to see once Vanguard is released, how they're able to adjust it, if the devs are actually able to adjust it. But if you guys are watching the stream right now, you see our Ego Chall correspondent Trem has already lost faith and is now saying that nothing drastic changes from the beta to the launch. And that's what I was trying to say, in an ideal world, that's the purpose of the beta. It doesn't seem like that's necessarily what we've gotten in recent years or in the past, but one can hope. So, that's where my head is at least with the Vanguard beta. I'm optimistic and maybe even wrongfully optimistic that stuff might change before launch. We'll just have to wait and see. In terms of weapons, the MP40 is a personal favorite of mine, just from the World at War days back when I started. I love the MP40 in that game, and it's by far the strongest sub in Vanguard right now. We don't have the PPSH yet in the Vanguard beta, so it's unclear. I believe it's been confirmed that the PPSH will be in Vanguard, but I'm not 100% sure. Regardless, you would assume it likely is in some form, but at this point in the beta, the MP40 is the strongest sub. The SCG is really strong AR, and then the bar is kind of like an OP AR that's just like, it's a little slow to move around with, but you can almost like two bullet people. So it seems like that might be excuse me. It seems like the bar would be a gun that's potentially just G8 off the rip if it stays at its current power level heading into launch. But again, we'll have to see. As Trem already puts in the chat right there, SCG and MP40 meta. It seems like just based off the beta, that could be the direction things are headed in, but we'll have to wait and see what else drops when the game is officially launched, if they do any weapon balance tuning, all that, yada yada.
As a viewer, it doesn't really interest me. Just like, it's essentially Modern Warfare with like a World War II skin, which like is not great, but I think when it comes down to competitive, like as a viewer, it'll be fine. Even the games that I don't like watching, like not including Ghosts, even the games I don't enjoy playing, not including Ghosts, I like watching them. I just think like having like the best players in the world play against each other is entertaining regardless of how crappy the game is or how boring the actual game is. And we've seen like even in the Call of Duty League, like the most mind-blowing thing of like the CDL actually acknowledging GAs, which was like honestly just unfathomable for me. But I think like we don't really have to worry about a bunch of broken stuff getting into the game and like actually affecting competitive in a meaningful way, because the players are going to take it in their own hands if the CDL doesn't. So whatever bad thing there is in like the beta or even the beginning of the game, I don't think it'll really matter all that much. But I don't know. Like it doesn't really interest me. This I probably won't play a ton if I do get the game, because if I get it for free again, I might play it. But who knows? I'm not gonna really commit to long term long term playing the game. But I don't know. Just in general, doesn't really seem that interesting. But if it has league play from like day one or like really soon after day one, then that would be nice. That would probably keep people interested a lot longer than playing pubs or having to play GBs like right off the rip.
Yep. Um, and Trem did just mention it there too. Uh, there are some questions with the new like destructible environments or elements stuff. In Vanguard, kind of like a Rainbow Six Siege. That's like the comparison people have been making. I haven't played Siege before, but that's what I've seen at least. There have been people like tweeting stuff over the recent days from the beta that players have been able to get into custom games and like check out the CDL rule set and see like what settings are able to be toggled on and off, what's banned and what's not. But obviously that's all unconfirmed because it's just in the betas and the game's not even officially out yet, so stuff can change. But it's interesting to see that technically that support for like a CDL playlist is actually there, just from like a rule set standpoint, not ranked. And they have some options to disable stuff like those destructible environments, and like toggle auto attack sprint on and off, or just tactical sprint. I forget. I'm still kind of confused. Trem and I were talking about it, and I was confusing myself talking about it. But yeah, we're just gonna have to wait and see with that what actually happens when the game drops. But I am obviously on the other side of the fence of you, and I like World War II games, so I'm a little bit more excited to play this than some other people are. And I don't know. Haters are gonna hate. We'll just have to see what product we get at the end of the day. I will probably end up playing it regardless, though.
I don't know if we have anything else to talk about on the show. We just kind of wanted to check in and go over some of the confirmations that we've gotten over the past few weeks. Like I mean, the off season, it's just a very difficult time because we don't really have any consistent base for us. But if you guys have suggestions for future episodes or like future topics, then 100% tweet at us, or just tweet at us. Like, it's probably the easiest way to actually tell us. So if you have suggestions for whatever we should do on the podcast to kind of waste away the off season, then please let us know. But I think we had a good episode. We talked about pretty much like you were talking about. Basically, half the league is confirmed, or almost confirmed, and then we know a lot of the other rosters that are still to come, or still to be announced. So yeah, we'll keep you guys updated if anything happens with the Dallas or Optic merger or the Washington acquisition, or if there are any teams that are still looking for players that they end up confirming them. So yeah, that's about does it for me. Do you just want me to do the outro, or you want to talk about anything else before we wrap up the episode?
I'm good to go.
All right, so subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We are also on YouTube, so all of our VODs for the stream, they go directly up to the YouTube the morning after. Make sure to give us 5-star rating on Apple Podcast. Follow us on Twitter. Bink is at jbink with 2 Ks. I'm at Presbyers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Don't know when the next show will be. I'd like to do every week or every other week just to kind of keep in some kind of routine, but if we have literally nothing to talk about, I don't know how we would really do any shows. So Yeah, you guys gotta step up your game and tell us what we should talk about so we can actually do podcasts and be somewhat entertaining. But no idea when the next show will be. Hopefully, more roster stuff will happen by next week and we can do it next Tuesday. But I'm not gonna commit to anything. Yep. So that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Like you said, thanks for tuning in. Always appreciate it. And if you guys have any feedback, anything like that, we're obviously open to hear it. So that's all I really got. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. And as always, remember to send the chow.